All right, welcome in once again, another week with Weather Chat. I'm your host today, meteorologist Scott Sumner, and with me is co-host, Chief Meteorologist Jackie Lair. Hello, Jackie. How are you doing today?
Hey there, Scott. I'm doing great. Feels great to be back in here, and I feel like we have a really interesting conversation coming up on this episode of Weather Chat, so thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. We certainly do. And with that, I want to bring in our guest today via Zoom here, Dr. Bob Thomas. How are you today? I know you a little formal, but I'm going to just call you Bob from now on. But, it's a proper introduction because you do have quite an impressive resume here, which we're going to talk about. But welcome in.
Thanks. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Whenever we get our guests, and when I reached out to you, I wanted to do something on weather and aviation because there seems to be a nice little tie-in here with that. And people that are in weather sometimes really gravitate towards flying and vice versa. Obviously, if you're a pilot, you've had some sort of weather background, some weather training. Obviously, you have to read maps and all that good stuff. So really cool. And you have a very impressive resume. Like I said, you got your Bachelor of Science in Aviation Human Factors, Atmospheric Sciences. That was at the University of Illinois. And then you didn't stop there. You went and you got your Master's, which is impressive enough here, Master's of Science in Aeronautics, Aviation, Aerospace, Education Technology, and Aviation Meteorology. And he said, well, you know what, I want to go a little further here. I want to take it one more step. I'm going to get my PhD and Doctor of Philosophy in Aviation, Aviation Safety, and Human Factors. So quite an impressive list there.
Well, yeah, thanks. I think, with all those degrees, you see a trend of human factors tied into that because there's a lot of interaction between pilots and airplanes. So studying how that works and, how to prevent some accidents from happening through human factors is part of it. In addition to all the weather, I actually enjoy weather. For a brief stint in college, I was a weatherman on radio and TV. And so I ended up switching and going towards the aviation path and out of the broadcasting path. But it's interesting because a lot of people see the weather, but they don't realize what it's like to actually fly through it and how important it is to understand not just the local, but the big picture too.
Yeah, there's quite a few tie-ins there with people are scared of turbulence. I have one very good friend who used to fly, hasn't flown in probably 10 years because he had a bad incident with turbulence. And I got to tell you, a little background on myself. I don't know if you know this, Jackie. My father was in the airlines for many years. He wasn't a pilot. He was, on the ground. But he had gone and actually saw when they started to build the plane and all the tests that the planes went through, that they would physically take the wing and bend it at almost a 45-degree angle to make sure that it was stable. And he said, turbulence,
it's nothing.
It's nothing. It's all in the head. It's all the psychology that you talk about there, which is great,
Oh my gosh, I learn something new every day.
As long as you're not going through the middle of a thunderstorm, it usually seems worse than it really is.
Yeah, absolutely.
Good. Well, Bob, also I wanted to ask you more so about, what drew you to aeronautical science and studying that as well?
I think it's just aviation in general. When I was younger, my uncle and aunt took me to an air show in Oshkosh, Wisconsin, and it's one of the biggest ones in the U.S. And I went every year from the age of 10 on until I started college, and just seeing all the airplanes, the air shows, learning that I could actually do aviation as a career. My uncle was an aviation mechanic and a pilot. So, a lot of times aviation tends to run through family lines as well. So I think it's just I just enjoyed it and I always have. I think with a lot of our students at Embry-Riddle, you'll find that a majority of them who go into pilot training really have decided at a very young age that that's what they want to do. I think it's one of the unique things about that career path is that aviation's kind of a bug that gets in your system, and then figuring out the best way to either make money doing it or find a career that lets you pay for it, because it's not always the cheapest either.
No, absolutely not. You have quite a few. That's a nice lead-in, actually, here, Bob, to your ratings and certificates here. You are a ground instructor, flight instructor, an airline transport pilot, and a remote pilot. I'm not really sure what is a remote pilot.
Right.
It's the commercial ability to make money flying drones.
was about to say, I was like, it has to be drone. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was wondering. Yeah.
That's one of the newer FAA certificates that they have.
Yeah, absolutely. Drones are now the talk of the town for
Yes,
sure.
yes.
That is something. All right. Well, we just touched on a little bit here with aviation focused questions and talking a little bit of that. We're going to talk more about that coming up in our next segment as Jackie and I have a couple more questions for Bob. But in the meantime, we're going to take a quick break and we'll be right back. All right, welcome back here into Weather Chat today. I have, of course, the full panel. I've got my co-host Jackie Lair, and I've got with us here Zoom on Zoom, I should say, Bob. And Bob has actually is a pilot and has his degree in aviation. And we were talking about aviation questions just a little while ago here, Bob, and wanted to go forth and ask you this question, basically: how has pilot training changed in the last 10 to 20 years, would you say?
I think there's a couple different ways we could look at it. One is the actual demand of pilots needed has gone up quite a bit. So the sheer number of people wanting to get into aviation because they see the opportunity has gone up. So I'd say a lot more people have gone into it. The other part is technology and how that always ties into the pilot training, because simulation is used extensively in aviation. And now we're starting to see, especially lately, the addition of virtual reality and how some of that can be used in simulation. And then, of course, all those tying into how the FAA allows us to actually use the technology. And that can vary quite a bit depending on who you are and what you're trying to do. The airlines tend to have a lot more flexibility in using technology than some of the regular civilian basic steps upward for aviation.
You said a key word, AI. And AI is everywhere now. How does that, I'm going to piggyback on, how does AI come into play in simulation?
Well, I think, there's a couple different aspects to it, and it's still in a new phase. At my university, we're trying to use AI to help grade students' performance, have them replay some different activities. But there's a lot of, learning curves with that to see how to use it properly and making sure that's actually giving you the information that you want to use. So we're trying that, and we're using that in addition to other technology aspects like simulation, some online learning, trying to get the students a more, full picture and really make their training time more efficient and optimize it.
Oh, okay. Very cool.
I know. All these different skills over the last 10 to 20 years.
Yeah.
Incredible. But also, Bob, what skills separate a good pilot from a great pilot?
Well, I think there's a lot of trying to see the big picture at once. It's very easy to get tunnel vision and so focus on one thing at a time. But when you're flying, there's a lot of different things going on. You have air traffic control, other airplanes, trying to make sure you're not going into, like down here, we have NASA, make sure you don't go into the restricted areas by NASA, watching out for airspace. The traffic congestion in Florida is very big. So we're trying to actually see everything that's going on if you're a flight instructor, while you're teaching a student, or even if you're just a private pilot cruising around, just trying to navigate some of these more complex areas can be challenging. So I think being able to multitask is one part of it, but then also continuing to have a willingness to learn and to try to maintain your currency and proficiency as a pilot is important too.
Yeah, good points. I live by an airport. Do you live by an airport?
I do.
You do,
Yes,
right?
yes.
And every once in a while, we see those little Cessnas flying above us, and on clear, sunny skies, and even cloudy skies, but calm weather.
Yeah.
And boy, I think about that because actually, to be honest with you, Bob, I actually thought about trying to get my pilot's license myself. It takes money, it takes some time, it takes due diligence and real patience. Who knows? Maybe one day. But what's one mistake if I were to if I were to take go for the pilot's license? What's one mistake a student like myself could commonly make?
If you're starting from scratch and you're talking about yourself, I think the first part is realizing what the whole entire process takes. and how, like, for a brand new private pilot, at least 40 hours of training, but realizing that it's probably going to take closer to 50 to 55. And so a lot of schools might advertise the minimums, but there's the realistic because it's to your proficiency to be able to do it. The other big thing is because you're learning new skills, making sure that you do it consistently. So you'd probably have to fly 2 or 3 times a week to really do it properly. A lot of people who kind of do it off on the side for fun might do it once every other week and then wonder why it takes forever. So you really have to kind of commit to it because it is learning a new physical skill in addition to all the knowledge and that repetition, especially getting to flight maneuvers and landings and those types of things. The consistency is what really pays off to get it done quickly, or at
Yeah.
least properly.
Yeah, exactly. Good points.
Yeah, and also, I mean, you're talking about consistency. The weather is really never consistent too. So I'm sure every time that they're trying to, get those hours done, that weather could be different each time. I mean, which is good, but over time you have to build those skills on those separate days and separate times of
Yeah,
different
but
weather.
like
But
in your area where you have ice and snow and things, little
uh-huh.
Cessnas can't fly in that. So that kind of shuts you down for a while. That's why Florida's so busy because we don't really have, with the exception of a couple weeks ago, we don't really have those kinds of weather conditions. And so a lot of places will open up flight schools down here, and a lot of people come to, Florida, Texas, Arizona, some of those areas because winter isn't an issue as much as it could be.
Yeah, and then do you have like any more advice for anyone who wants to fly professionally besides, going into it knowing that they're going to have to probably dedicate more time?
I think a lot of people just assume that they're just going to be able to get jobs easy. And from a backup plan perspective, like I always envisioned trying to go to the airlines, but every time I tried to go, for whatever reason or not, the economy tanked, those kind of things, the airlines are always hiring in cycles. And so if you want to be an airline pilot, you kind of have to catch the timing at the right point. And I kind of missed out, which is sort of why I kept staying in school, getting degrees, and kind of going down that path for myself. But there's always the joke of having some sort of backup plan because, for the longest time, if you talk to older airline pilots, they'll say they count how many times they've been furloughed from the airlines
Hmm.
and trying to have something to do. But, I think now it's a little bit different. There's more of a demand, a little bit more consistency, and you have mandatory pilot retirements at 65. And so there's always like these pilots kind of leaving the industry now. So but it still goes in cycles with hiring and not hiring and up and down. But plan on working somewhere and building some time as a flight instructor, as a commercial pilot to get the hours that you need to go to the airlines.
Yeah, yeah, some turnover there for sure.
Hmm.
That's something, unfortunately, we all have to go through at some
Yeah.
point. Very interesting stuff, Bob. We are now going to take a quick little break here, and then we are going to talk a little bit of weather and aviation. So stick around for that. Come right back. All right, welcome back here on Weather Chat, talking with Bob Thomas, aviation expert as well, meteorologist. And Bob, we just talked a little bit about aeronautical information. Now we're going to get into the weather story. But Jackie, you lead off. You got a question for Bob.
Sure. I was wondering, what weather phenomenon causes the most operational challenges in aviation? I feel like I have a feeling I know what it is, but I wanted you, Bob, to answer this.
I think, that's a loaded question too, because it
Right.
also depends on which region you're at. Because in the wintertime up north, that can shut everything down quite a bit. But typically across the whole country, lines of thunderstorms really do the most sort of shutting down of the airspace. And, if you have a cold front coming across the whole US and you have a line of thunderstorms right there and it's kind of just moving to the east, it's really just sort of like a wall that all the airplanes have to go around or wait for it to pass by. And when you have major hubs like O'Hare and New York, even the DC area, if those airports get sort of hit by some weather, it can shut down all the connection flights, everything else, and the whole airspace system starts to get to a nice delayed crawl, if you will, that way. So, I would probably say thunderstorms number one, really bad winter storms number two, and then even there's some times where just some low ceilings, low clouds can really, and some fog and visibility can just cause some issues. But I think thunderstorms are probably the worst one because airlines can fly through ice and snow for the most part, but the thunderstorms are the things that we really have to be careful and avoid.
Did you get insight into my questions here, Bob? Because it's a perfect segue to what I was going to ask here. What would you consider more dangerous now out of these options, icing, turbulence, or wind shear, and why?
I think wind shear is usually the one, especially when you're low to the ground. Because when you talk about wind shear, you're talking about a change in wind speed or direction. And when you're trying to come in to take off or land and you experience a sudden drop of airspeed, that could be devastating to the airplane. You might not even have enough time to recover. So a lot of the airplanes, like Boeing, Airbus, will have wind shear detection capability inside the airplane to even try and help warn the pilots if it starts to happen. I think icing is also a factor. If you look at the smaller airplanes like Cessnas, they're not allowed to fly in icing conditions. Maybe you can get into it by accident, but they don't have the capability to remove the ice like an airline would. So the larger airplanes will have heated wings that can actually get ice off. Some of the larger, small airplanes can have pneumatic air boots that actually inflate and pop ice off the front of the wings to get rid of some of the ice. And so, some airplanes are actually designed to withstand a certain amount of it, but you get into something like the Cessna we were talking about earlier, it can't handle that.
Interesting. So we're talking about all these different, weather phenomenons, but what's the most misunderstood weather concept among pilots?
That's an interesting question. I think,
I feel
I've
like
always
it's going to be different
found
for everyone,
part of what I do is a lot of check rides. So I do a lot of testing of pilots, and I always sort of find two different groups of people who really love weather and people who just deal with it because they have to. And, I think actually embracing that you're flying in weather all the time and understanding how it happens, and when you start to see like different cloud formations pop up and what those mean. And it can be insightful if you know a little bit about the meteorology background behind it, as opposed to just sort of looking and going, yes, it's clear or not. I think there's also a lot of pilots who call them fair weather pilots who only fly when it's nice outside.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And all of
that'd
a
be
sudden
me.
then all of a sudden they fly and the weather forecast changes. And no offense, but sometimes meteorologists are wrong, right? And so,
Oh, yeah.
That's news to me. No, I'm sorry. I'm joking. I'm joking.
but sometimes unforecasted weather can really cause a hiccup in plans, and that can catch people off guard. And that's when mistakes start to happen too.
So that leads us to how do you make a go or no go decision when weather is marginal?
I think part of it is the actual capabilities of the aircraft itself, and a lot of it goes into your own personal minimums. The FAA puts a big emphasis on identifying your own personal minimums, what you feel comfortable with. And really, the only time you get experience is actually flying in poor weather and flying, if you're new, having somebody who's got some experience to actually fly with you in those kind of conditions helps you build that experience and a little bit of confidence to be able to handle it and really to know what you can handle and what's a little bit too dangerous.
Right. And I know that you were talking about, fair weather, but when you're 3,000, I don't know how many feet up in the sky, do you ever look out and just wonder, you're like, oh, that sunset just looks beautiful out there. I can't believe this is a job that I'm doing. Is that something that you go to work every day and you feel like, wow, this is a dream?
Oh, it's really nice. I think I live in Florida right by the beach, so I take off and I have the whole shoreline. So I mean, it's a nice view from that way. I mean, some of my favorite days, especially in the Midwest where you get some low ceilings, is it's overcast, gray, cloudy, and then you just pop through the top of the clouds and it's perfectly clear and sunny. And I'm wearing sunglasses and everybody else is in there with umbrellas and rain. So
Oh,
Love that.
okay. Yeah, no, it's true.
Yeah.
Weather happens in an instant.
It really does.
My professor used to say weather is 20% chaos and 80% boredom. And every once in a while that's true. All right, well, we're going to take another quick break here, and we'll be right back with some follow-up questions on weather and aviation with Dr. Bob Thomas. All right, welcome back here to Weather Chat. We're talking aviation with Bob Thomas down in Florida, a pilot as well as a meteorologist. Of course, Jackie Layer is sitting right by my side here. All right, so we ended it just a few moments ago talking about meteorology and weather questions, and we're going to continue with that actually. So, Bob, how reliable are aviation weather forecasts in practice?
I think for the most part, they're pretty good because a lot of them are more short-term type outlook forecasts. So the primary things that we use would be are called METARs and TAF. So a METAR is the hourly observation from the airport, and then the TAF is a 24-hour forecast. And a lot of those are made locally with the local National Weather Service offices and computer models helping. And so those are good. And if they're not good, a lot of times they'll be amended and changed. And so I think they're not always perfect, but they're pretty reliable. And a good pilot will also look and see this is what the forecast says. Is this what it really looks like outside? And you kind of compare the two and see if the forecast is matching what reality is showing. There's
Yeah,
also a variety of other weather products that are made in more 6 hour, 12-hour, 24-hour terms in terms of like turbulence, icing, though, even thunderstorm forecasts in general that are there too. And there's a huge website, aviationweather.gov, where you can go through and peruse all these, even if you're not a pilot, for free. And there's actually some really good stuff on there.
Yes,
Jackie's shaking her head.
I use it every day.
Yeah.
I need
So,
more of those airports and the information and the METARs. I appreciate those.
yes.
Oh
It
yeah,
is kind of learning a new language though, so it takes a little bit of getting used to. But once you get it, it's almost faster to read the text than it is to look at any graphics.
Yes,
Yeah.
I agree.
very
They
true.
drilled that into our heads at Penn State in meteorology. So
Yeah.
I appreciate looking at that website every day with all the observations. But Bob, also, can you share a real example where weather played a critical role in a flight that you may have noticed?
Well, I fly in Florida a lot, and in the non-winter season, it's basically thunderstorm season all the time. And even though I live near the ocean, thunderstorms do pop up almost every afternoon. And so it's really just a matter of, at least for me, understanding what some of the upper level winds are doing to see where they're going to move. And you can fly, they're smaller little pop-up thunderstorms, not like the huge supercells or big squall lines that you see in other parts of the country for the most part. And so even though we have some onboard weather in the airplane, it's really not as good as looking outside. And even you could even argue that some of the National Weather Service radar images are better and faster updating than some of the airborne weather, but that's a whole nother discussion for another day. But actually seeing some of those thunderstorms form, using some of my own knowledge of what the winds are doing, what a thunderstorm looks like, and trying to kind of move and navigate around them or trying to land before the storm hits. I mean, that can be kind of a challenge that way too, but it is, I mean, in a way, it's kind of fun. I always joke and say that it's more fun flying in interesting weather than some of the, boring, nice sunny days. But
Isn't it true that really the most dangerous part of a flight is the takeoff and the landing, right? Not so much
yes,
the in-flight.
as long as you're not flying through a line of thunderstorms, yes.
Right. Yeah.
But
Absolutely.
for the most part, a lot of the, like wind shear, some of the other factors, even just the congestion in and around airports make it a little more challenging too, because everybody's trying to get to the airport. So when you get away from the airport, people kind of spread out a bit, but then you're trying to come in to land. And Daytona, especially, is one of the busier airports in the region because of all the flight training. And so you could have half-hour delays to take off just because there's so much volume of traffic from small airplanes. So it's an interesting, a little bit of everything thrown at you.
Yeah, as you said here, Bob, you're in Florida, so you don't really get much winter stuff. But I do have a photo here with Jackie. You can see that,
Yes,
right?
yes.
And here we go, Bob. And again, this is de-icing of planes. Now, could you give us a little insight at maybe how long something like this takes? Because people get a little antsy when they're sitting on a plane for a
Right.
long amount of time.
Yeah, well, it kind of depends too, because the whole de-icing process in itself is quite unique because the whole reason you have to be de-iced is to remove any frost or ice on the surfaces of the airplane because that can affect the aerodynamics. And so the first step you do is if there's anything on the airplane, they usually spray it with sort of a warmer water mixture with some glycol mixed into it. And then once they get everything off the plane, then they coat it with, in that picture, it was sort of like an orangey color, but sometimes it's also green. There's different types of de-icing fluids, and those are designed to adhere to the surfaces to prevent any ice from forming until you start to take off. So the airplane itself, with the engines, can take some heat from the engines and combustion and duct it through the airplane and all the leading edges of the wings, the rudder, the horizontal stabilizer, and even the engine nacelles themselves to keep the ice from forming. But they usually don't do that unless you're going at a faster speed because the engines have to be creating enough power to create enough heat. So the de-icing fluid gets sprayed on there, and it's essentially designed to, when you reach a certain airspeed, about when the airplane can de-ice itself with the heat,
Mm-hmm.
to actually kind of blow off the wings. So you'll actually see all that stuff sort of stick to the airplane, and then once you get faster, you'll see it kind of run back and just sort of disappear.
How long does that take actually to apply, and how long does it really last?
The first question, anywhere between probably 10 to 20 minutes, depending on how busy it is, or like in that picture, you saw two people doing it at once on the airplane. So some of the more like larger airports that are used to it have a whole process and little scoreboards that tell you some information, because it's called the FAA holdover table, and they put out new ones every year. But it basically says from the time that you start de-icing, how long you have until you're allowed to take off. And those times change based on if it's snowing, if it's cold, like what the weather conditions are doing can affect it, but it can be anywhere between 20 to 40 minutes before you have to leave the ground.
Oh,
And if
wow.
you don't in that time, then they make you pull back around and get de-iced again.
Right.
So there's
Wow.
usually, if you do get de-iced, you usually notice that you take off fairly quickly right afterwards.
Oh
Yep.
my goodness.
But
Hmm.
Well,
what usually makes it uncomfortable for the passengers is that you actually turn off the engines because you don't want any of that ingested into the engines. And the smell is not always the most pleasant. Some people call it like an antifreeze type smell, but it's just the de-icing fluid itself is kind of similar to the antifreeze type of smell.
Hmm.
And so then it gets kind of stuffy in the plane and smells funny. And then shortly after they restart the engines, then you go.
oh, okay. All right. How would you say professional pilots interpret weather differently from students, Bob?
Right.
Well, if you're looking at a professional pilot perspective, it's your job. And so you're you're probably going to be flying unless it's really, really bad. If you're a student pilot and you're learning how to fly, your threshold of what is too bad to fly, or like we talked about earlier, how flying could be expensive. If you go on a day where it's kind of poor weather, you could be wasting your money because you're not going to be able to practice what you need to. So I think there's two different ways of looking at it, as one from the training eye, but then the other is if you're an airline, you're trying to go so that you can, get your passengers to where they need to go and make some money for yourself at the same time. So,
Oh, good points. Good points. Well, boy, this is
Fascinating.
fascinating stuff. I got to tell you, and we're going at a good clip here. I can't believe we still have a little more to talk about here. We've got some more questions coming up on basic career and industry insight here, Jackie. So
Yeah.
we're going to take another quick break, and we'll be right back with those questions. Stick around for that.
Hey there, I'm Chief Meteorologist Jackie Layer. We are back. I'm here with meteorologist Scott Sumner, also here with Dr. Bob Thomas, and we've been talking about aviation and weather. Dr. Bob Thomas, he is a professor. He's also a pilot. He also has studied meteorology, so he has a lot going on and good background to talk about, the differences between, or maybe not the differences, but weather and aviation and how those combine to make everyone safe as they're flying from day to day. But we wanted to go more in depth with the career path that people can take if they are interested in both weather and aviation. So, Bob, what career paths combine meteorology and aviation, and what have you found in studying both?
I think it's fair to say that any job in aviation having an understanding of the weather is important because it is a huge factor in causing delays. And if you're really trying to have good customer service,
Hmm.
understanding how to schedule properly and those types of things. But, from the pilot perspective, trying to navigate the airspace and the weather safely if you know more than just being able to read what the temperature is at the surface and you actually understand how a thunderstorm forms or what fronts do or where turbulence could be and how to avoid it or how to get out of it, that could be something that could save your life. So meteorology and aviation, I think, go almost the same because we are using where the weather happens for the most part.
That's true.
Yeah, very true. And I think I know the answer to this next question I'm going to ask you, but I might as well ask it anyway. Is advanced meteorology training valuable for airline pilots?
Absolutely, because if you think most of the airline pilots and airlines themselves are flying up at higher altitudes. So you're not even in the lowest layer of the atmosphere anymore. You're in the stratosphere, so the troposphere, and you have jet streams, you have other kind of more advanced things that, beginning pilots might not realize at first. But if you can find a way to fly with a 100-knot tailwind, you can make your flight go a whole lot faster. And, clear air turbulence. We talked about turbulence before, understanding where the icing could be, and even asking for deviations from routes based on weather. When you get to larger airplanes too, they all have weather radars in the nose. And so actually understanding radar meteorology, attenuation, some of the other different things about radar and how it works, and actually interpreting what you have in front of you can also help you kind of tactically navigate through some of the more significant weather events.
You mentioned, and I've seen this because I've watched a lot of different videos on flying. People think you just fly from point A to point B in a straight line. No, you actually fly the curvature of the Earth, basically, and that is your fastest point. So I thought that was pretty interesting. A lot of people don't know that, but yeah, to get to say Japan, you don't go to California and then out through Hawaii across the Pacific that way.
Nope, you go
Kinda
up and over.
up and over.
Yeah.
Yeah, curvature of the Earth. Follow that, and the reason why I bring that up is it tied into what you said about following the jet stream and some of the fastest wind flows. So that's interesting there. Jackie?
Yeah. So also, I know that we kind of covered this a little bit before, but I know so much has changed within the last 10 to 20 years. But what's some of the emerging technology that might be exciting to pilots that are emerging and unlearning right now?
Well, I think, in weather, if we look at weather for a second, just the sheer number of images, data, things that are being put together from so many different sources. We talked about the aviationweather.gov website. And there used to be a whole lot of different text-based forecasts that have been replaced by graphic imagery. And being able to use that helps people visualize what the weather is actually doing. We've done a lot of research in trying to figure out ways that pilots can brief themselves on what the weather is during their route of flight and trying to make some decisions based on what they see or not see, and really trying to teach people how to get the full, start to finish from the weather perspective. But technology is still in simulation. We can simulate a lot of the bad weather. It's still not as intense as like a real world scenario, but we can actually give them practice. For example, in Florida, there's not as many low ceiling, bad visibility days, especially in the summertime, as you would have up in the Northeast or the Midwest. And so being able to simulate some of those weather conditions, even though we're in Florida, would help them become better pilots too.
Yeah, yeah, good stuff there. How do airlines use meteorologists in daily operations?
Well, some meteorologists are, every airline will have a dispatch group that puts together a lot of the flight plans and all the information for the pilots. And depending on what airline want to do, they a lot of times will have some meteorologists on staff to help them with some weather decisions. The FAA also has some meteorologists that work with air traffic controllers to help kind of navigate and decide what's going to happen with the weather, give some forecasts, some timing, because a lot of that's more of, trying to be proactive, but also reactionary to what the weather's actually doing in terms of, because we're talking, if you have a big cold front coming through the US, you're then going to have to deviate hundreds of flights around it and trying to coordinate that with air traffic control. And they'll even have calls that like almost like a Zoom call with some of the airlines and air traffic control to say, here's what's going to happen, here's what we're going to do, and try and make the whole system move smoothly as much as they can.
And when that happens, Thanksgiving and Christmas, right?
Right, exactly. Usually, the busiest times to travel. Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, Bob, also, what has been your most memorable weather-related flight experience off the top of your head? I know we're throwing this at you right now, but most memorable.
So there was one time where I was flying from Daytona Beach all the way to London, Ontario, Canada, in one of our twin engine airplanes, bring it up to the factory in Canada. And for whatever reason, because it's normally VFR, nice clear weather everywhere, the moment I took off, it was solid clouds all the way up to Canada. So it was like 10 hours of just being in a cloud, and I saw nothing. And I had to do approaches to airports with the visibility at the minimums for at least three airports where I stopped and got fuel on the way.
Wow.
And so I'll never forget coming out of the clouds in Buffalo
Yeah.
and seeing the approach light system that's like a mile long, and all I could see are strobe lights and trying to find the airport when you break out of the clouds.
Yeah.
Oh
That's
my.
incredible.
So I
Very
mean,
That's a
scary.
little scary.
it's not scary, but it's just something that's unique, and you don't always get to do that because you need the weather to kind of be bad in order to really use those navigation aids and the lighting, the approach light systems. That's what they're designed for. And being down here a lot, I don't always see those types of conditions as much as I used to.
Yeah.
Well, I know that you mentioned it was a mile long. Does, those areas that typically have, more low visibility, more fog, do they have longer runways compared to others?
Not necessarily the runways, but
Okay.
you're used any kind of airport that supports a lot of the airline traffic will have a lot more infrastructure and a lot more approach light systems and different ILS systems to help the airplanes actually get to the airport.
Right.
So I think it's more of a matter of because they're so busy in larger airports, they kind of have more money to spend on some of those tools to make sure that the weather, even though it is a factor, tries to limit the impact as much as possible.
So
I
you
always
have the
wondered.
best. I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
You have the best of both worlds. Jackie's question gave you insight into actual flying experience.
Yeah.
And you also teach. So my question for you is, what do you enjoy most about teaching aeronautical science?
I think it's, I love aviation. I've always loved flying and being able to see people who enjoy it as much as I do and try and teach them certain things. It helps. I get enjoyment of sharing that with the students. And I think a lot of it too is I still fly actively on a regular basis. So when they're in my classes, they know that I'm actually doing it for real, and I can bring some of those experiences back to them and help them learn. And hopefully, if there's any mistakes that I saw or any bad situations, I can tell them about it to keep them from having to go through it themselves. So trying to
All
give
right.
them those experiences so they don't have to repeat what poor things might have happened from either my experiences, or we look at a lot of accident reports and things like that too, so we don't repeat some of those bad situations.
Sure. All right. We're going to take a quick break. You mentioned students. We're going to talk about why they're a key here coming up on the other side of the break. Stick to them. All right, welcome back. In our last segment today, I thought this would be interesting to bring to you here, Bob. Obviously, you're a teacher. We talked about that. You have a lot of students that you teach. And with that, you get rated. I actually found a website here. Let's pull that up. There we
Right.
go. And it's called Rate My Professor website. But you know what? That 4.8 is out of 5, Bob.
Oh, that
That's
sounds
really
good.
good.
That's
I
really
think we'll
good.
go
Thumbs
with
up.
that.
Yes.
Thumbs up. That is awesome. So, I thought this would be interesting. You could see there. Let me see if I can move this. If I can get this to move, interact. Okay, here we go. So I think I can do this.
And I love how 100% say that they would take it again.
Well, I
Yeah.
try to be more of a realistic professor. I've had my experiences of interesting professors back in the day. And so I try to, and even as being a flight instructor, you fly with a lot of different people. It's very, I think, important to pull what you think are the good qualities from the people who teach you and avoid some of the bad qualities.
Right.
And
Yeah.
trying to be a more realistic and give real world examples. One of the classes that I teach primarily right now is called aircraft performance, which looks at how, with the technology the way it is, they pretty much just pop up on an iPad or something. Here's what the airplane's going to do. Here's how much distance you're going to need to take off. Here's how heavy you're going to be, that sort of stuff. And my class goes into really the background of where does all that information come from. So it looks like magic when you see it, but I try and give them some of the background of what that is. In addition to teaching some of the other FAA courses like private instrument and commercial or flight instructor courses as well. So
Well, I just wanted to show that to you because I tell you what, that's a great rating right there.
I think I'm going to print that out and hang it on my wall when we're
There you
done.
go.
You,
Yes.
you should. That's going to
Frame
be
it. Yes.
along with your master's
Yes,
and your PhD.
All the other certificates, the awards, put that also front and center, that one too.
Make it sound like I need more walls.
That's right. You will. You will.
Yep.
Well, it has been. We're up against the clock here, Bob. But we could talk forever on this. We love this topic. Might have to bring it back. We'll
Yes.
talk about that off air. But anyway, again, thank you so much for joining us here and discussing what we know and what we don't know about aviation and weather.
Yeah.
And it was a lot of fun. So with that being said, God bless. Be well. Stay safe, and we'll talk again next time.
Thank you very much for having me.